Gentlemen, let me tell you a bit about myself. My name is Putri Nabila with student ID number 241221070, and I'm from class management morning A. I'd like to talk to you today about inflation. The aim today is to discuss inflation in Indonesia. I plan to speak for about 10 minutes. So inflation. Definition of inflation. Reporting from Bank Indonesia, inflation can be interpreted as an increase in the prices of goods and services in general and continuously within a certain period of time. Inflation calculation is carried out by the Badan Pusat Statistik or BPS. An increase in the price of one or two goods alone cannot be called inflation unless the increase extends or causes price increase to other goods. In addition to inflation, there is the term deflation, which is the opposite of inflation, namely a general and continuous decline in the price of goods. Meanwhile, according to the Central Bureau of Statistics, the definition of inflation can be cited as a tendency to increase the price of goods and services in general, which takes place continuously in the price goods of and services in the country increase in the inflation can occur. The increase in the price of goods and services causes a decrease in the value of money. Thus, inflation can also be interpreted as a decrease in the value of money against the value of goods and services in general. The Customer Price Index, or CPI, is an index that calculates the average price change of package of goods and service costs consumed by households over a certain period of time. CPI is an indicator used to measure the inflation rate. Change in the CPI from time to time describe the rate to increase or inflation or the rate of the decline or deflation of goods and services based on classification of individual consumption by purpose or COI/COP. CPI is broken into 7 expenditure groups, namely foodstuff, processed foods, beverage and tobacco, housing, clothing, health, education and sports, transportation and communication. Cause of inflation. 1. Demand pull inflation. Inflation in Indonesia is caused by X demand. The cause of inflation in Indonesia occurs when the demand or public demand for an item is quite high. Number 2, quantitative theory inflation. The cause of inflation in Indonesia is the increase in the money supply. The theory of inflation due to an increase in the money supply argues that there is a relationship between the money supply and prices. Number 3, Cost-plus inflation: the cause of inflation in Indonesia is an increase in production costs. Increased production cost inflation results from a continuous increase in production costs over a certain period of time. 4. Mixed inflation. Mixed inflation that occurs can be influenced by an increase in supply and demand so as to create an imbalance between the two things. 5. Expected inflation. The cost of inflation in Indonesia is the behavior of people who believe that the economic situation will improve in the future. Types of inflation based on severity. 1. Mild inflation. Mild inflation does not have much effect on the state of a country's economy because the price of goods or services only increase in general. Price increase in mild inflation is under 10% of year. Number 2, moderate inflation. Moderate inflation can affect economic activity because it can reduce the welfare of people with fixed incomes. The average increase in price inflation range from 10 to 30% of year. Number 3, heavy inflation. This type of heavy inflation can disrupt the economy because people no longer want to save in banks. This is because bank interest rates are much lower than the inflation rate. Price increase during times of high inflation vary between 30% and 100% of years. Number 4, very heavy inflation. Very heavy type of inflation is inflation that is already difficult to control because of the price increase in this inflation of more than 10% of years. Types of inflation by source. 1. Domestic inflation. Domestic inflation occurs, for example, with persistent budget deficits, products pylorus age. Under these circumstances, the government usually requires Bank Indonesia to print large amounts of new money to meet the government's needs. Another factor that can cause domestic inflation is higher domestic production costs and an increase in public demand for goods that also increase, while the increase in supply cannot compensate for it. Number 2, imported inflation. Inflation from abroad is also known as import inflation. Import inflation is caused by inflation abroad, which causes an increase in the price of imported goods. Developing countries tend to experience such inflation, and most of their production operations use foreign materials and tools spread throughout international trade. Inflation impact. Producers benefit from increase in the general price of goods and services. High inflation refers to an increase in the general price of goods and services. This can have a positive impact on producer. Inflation can largely cover production costs as selling prices have risen. Therefore, producer profits can increase. Number two, declining people's purchasing power. High inflation can weaken people's purchasing power, especially for workers who do not receive wage increase. Inflation makes the prices of goods and services rise. This, of course, will make a person's expense become large, while income does not increase or stay. In the end, people's purchasing power will weaken. Number three, affecting a country export capability. Inflation can also have a negative impact on a country export. The cost of inflation is the cost of export becomes more expensive. In addition, increase the price of export production, which can affect the competitiveness of products in export destination countries. In the end, this can reduce the country's foreign exchange. Inflation data. Based on data published by the Central Statistics Agency, the inflation rate in Indonesia in 2020 is 1. Based on data published by Central Statistics Agency, the inflation rate in Indonesia in 2010 is 1.68%. In the last 10 years, the annual inflation rate of 1.68% is the smallest annual inflation rate, where the average annual inflation rate within the 10 years is 4.23%. From the graph, we know that the inflation in Indonesia in 2011, there was an inflation but 3.79%. In in 2012, there was an inflation increase at 4.30%. In 2013, there was an inflation increase at 8.38%. In 2014, there was in, an inflation decrease at 8.30%. In 2015, there was an inflation decrease at 3.35%. In 2016, there was an inflation decrease at 3.0%. In 2017, there was an inflation increase at 3.661%. In 2018, there was an inflation decrease at 3.13%. In 2000 in 2000 in 2019, there was an inflation decrease at 2.172%. In 2020, there was an inflation decrease at 1.68%. How to deal with inflation? 1. Monetary policy. In this monetary policy, Bank Indonesia issued a policy to withdraw money circulating in the community. This can be done by selling securities, increase the money supply from commercial bank treasury, or increasing interest rates. Number two, fiscal policy. In fiscal policy, it can be related to state budget revenues and expenditures. The government can increase tax rates and make savings on government spending. In addition to monetary and fiscal policy, inflation can also managed by increasing production, facilitating import of imported goods, stabilizing income or wage levels, setting maximum prices, and monitoring and distributing goods. Thank you very much for your great attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your listening. My audios we have shared the beneficial for all of you. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you.